a Matco leak down tester. Going to put 100 pounds of air. Showing a 85% leak down. Valves are closed. The motor was just unwrapped about 30 minutes ago. And
as you tighten this gasket down with a plate we made to simulate a block off on the exhaust, the leakage drops down to about 51 psi from 85 to 90 psi. So we already know that we have an exhaust leak coming out of the valve seals, or the valve seats on the exhaust valves. So that is one of the problems we have.
And we'll grab some rags for...
And this is on the number 6 cylinder. We are going to go through and test 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then 1. And we will mark all of these down.
Moderate leakage is acceptable on a dry motor. High leakage is not. Again, removing the exhaust plate. The loud pop you heard was air escaping from the exhaust valves and the exhaust plenum.
Alright, we're moving on to cylinder 5.
100 pounds of air. Sitting at roughly an 80% leak.
After tightening down the gasket with the block off plate, again we have about 51 to 52 psi. Cylinder number 3, and again, excuse me for the last one on, or excuse me, cylinder number 4 is what we're testing right now. On cylinder 5, I accidentally said PSI of leakage. I meant percentage of leakage, excuse me. So we're putting 100 PSI into the cylinder through this adapter that sits where the injector would normally sit. And it does have the copper O-ring, and we'll show you that on the next cylinder for cylinder 3. But here we're going to introduce air into the cylinder here. We've got 90, 80, we're moving up here. 80, 78, 79% leakage. We're going to go ahead and tighten down this gasket here. And you can see as we tighten that down, the leakage drops. So again, showing a leak. When this is blocked off, the air can't escape out the exhaust at all. So quite the leak there, because we're at about 45 to 47%. Again, that high-pitched pop is air escaping out of the exhaust port.
Okay, 89 inch-pounds.
We're going to torque this down to 89 inch-pounds. Proper torque spec for these injectors.
This is the injector tool we're using. Copper sealing washer on the bottom. Sealing washer for the mating surface. that is provided out of the Matco 1570 compression and leak down test kit. Cylinder number 3.
Again, 100 psi, and this is our percentage of leakage. And once again, as we tighten down that gasket, you can see the leakage goes down. This one leaking less than some of the other ones. Once that is blocked off, which means that those valve seats, are leaking more than the other ones. Again, we'll move this onto the next cylinder.
So the plate we're using, block off plate and a Cummins OE gasket to seal up,
along with Cummins OE exhaust manifold bolts. We're now on cylinder number 2. Just over 80% leakage. And we'll tighten down the gasket. This one is about 38%, and we will crack this loose. And again, by bolting this down all the way and blocking the air from coming out the exhaust, going all the way to 38, that says that this cylinder is leaking quite a bit. And on to cylinder number 1. And again, tightening down just like we've done on the other 5 cylinders. And as soon as you tighten that down, and each one of these, again, has been a little bit different, which tells me also that there's an inconsistent grind on these valve seats. So none of these exhaust valve seats are seating properly, which does not really constitute for a test on the intake side or the rings. If the valve seats are leaking that bad, it's going to cause a leak down the road. The truck's going to burn oil. Again, I'm the shop owner. This is Jake Carroll. We've got Kyle, my employee, the truck owner Cody here, and a friend of mine named Greg, who's also run a very successful farming and ag repair business. Both of these gentlemen, Kyle and Greg, were trained through John Deere, have a lot of diesel experience, I've got 7 years of diesel repair experience and 2 years of tech school. So, I mean, there's enough experience here to say that this motor really should not go into this truck. It's going to end up burning oil, causing issues, and the customer's going to have to come back and have it redone again. This test was also done with no rockers installed, and the reason we test these with no rockers installed on the motor is for the purpose that when you have these installed and they're on the rocker pedestal and these are bolted down, they're obviously riding on a camshaft in the motor. The injector will normally sit inside, so we take the injector out, put the tool inside. When these rocker arms are on and they're seated onto the camshaft and torqued down properly, these will be open. Some of them will be closed because of the camshaft, and then you'd have to go make sure you're on top dead center on each cylinder. So doing it this way with none of this installed, as the motor comes, all of the valves are closed, all of the pistons, it doesn't matter where they're sitting on top dead center or not, due to the fact that the rings are seated, the rings are on the piston, and the only places it can leak, the air can leak, is either out the exhaust, out the intake valves, exhaust valves, or the piston seal, or the piston rings, excuse me. So this test, by doing it with no rocker arms in, consistently going from one cylinder to the next, you make sure you have a good solid test.
All right, this is putting back together the Matco compression and leak tester. When you're running it as a leak down tester, you remove the Schrader valve. The Schrader valve is in there for the purposes of compression testing, so your gauge stays tight. So, Schrader.
What we're doing right now by putting this Schrader valve back in this piece is now that the air cannot escape out of this, so we are testing the integrity of the hose, the fitting, and the gauge. With 100 psi, there is 0% leakage. So the gauge is calibrated. There's nothing wrong with the gauge. We've got the hose, the setup. We just check the integrity of the gauges. Understand that when you do test a motor that has not been run on an unseated motor, one that hasn't been run, one warmed up, this is still, as you can see on the crate, hasn't been messed with. We will expect some leakage, about 30%. We're assuming on about 30%, due to the fact that the rings have not seated yet. So we do understand that fact, but having that much leakage coming out of the exhaust ports is not acceptable.